The golden hues of the late afternoon sun bathed the town of Maple Ridge in warmth, as children's laughter echoed across the playground. Emma Carter sat quietly on a weathered park bench, her eyes fixed on her 6-year-old daughter Lily, as the girl swung back and forth, giggling with the unbridled joy of youth. To the outside world, Emma was just another single mother, blending seamlessly into the idyllic suburban landscape. Few would guess that behind her calm demeanor lay the sharp instincts and lethal skills of one of the military's most decorated Marine snipers. At 35, Emma had traded the harsh realities of war for a quieter life, choosing Maple Ridge as a sanctuary for herself and Lily. She wanted nothing more than to give her daughter the peaceful childhood she never had. But Emma's instincts, honed over a decade of service in covert operations, never truly rested. Her eyes constantly scanned the environment, subtly analyzing every movement, every sound. Her focus snapped to the distant rumble of engines before anyone else noticed. The sound was faint at first, but quickly grew louder, a menacing thunder that shattered the peaceful ambience of the park. Emma's grip tightened on her pen, her ungraded papers momentarily forgotten. 5 motorcycles emerged from the horizon, roaring into the park entrance like predators circling their prey. The air seemed to shift, a tangible unease spreading among the families enjoying the afternoon. The bikes came to a halt, their riders dismounting with practiced intimidation. They were members of a notorious motorcycle gang known as the Iron Fangs, their leather jackets emblazoned with the image of a snarling wolf. At the forefront stood their leader, Marcus Steele Kane, a towering figure with a face scarred by years of violence. His presence was commanding, his reputation even more so. Behind him were his 2 trusted lieutenants, Viper and Crow, their eyes scanning the park like vultures, assessing their next meal. Emma's heart pounded, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of a soldier preparing for battle. She stood, her movements calculated, and called out to her daughter in a voice that betrayed none of her tension. "Lily, sweetheart, come here for a moment." Lily, unaware of the danger, hopped off the swing and ran to her mother, her pigtails bouncing with each step. Emma knelt and wrapped an arm around her daughter, her other hand subtly guiding Lily behind her. "Stay close to me," Emma murmured, her voice gentle yet firm. Steele's gaze locked onto Emma, a predatory smile spreading across his face. "Well, well, what do we have here? A hard-working mom enjoying the afternoon?" His voice dripped with false charm, but his eyes held a sinister edge. Emma's posture remained relaxed, but her mind raced as she analyzed the situation. The gang members were armed, concealed weapons bulged beneath their jackets. Their formation was deliberate, designed to control the crowd and block the main exits. This wasn't a random visit, it was a calculated display of dominance. "We're just leaving," Emma said calmly, her voice carrying the same authority she used in her classroom. But Steele wasn't easily dismissed. "That's too bad," he said, taking a step closer, "because we're here to discuss a little business opportunity. Protection, you might call it. This town has been lacking in it, and we're here to fix that." Emma's eyes narrowed. "The police handle protection here." Steele chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "The police are slow, but us, we're always around, always watching. And for a small monthly fee, we can make sure accidents don't happen." Behind her, Lily clung tightly to her mother's leg, her small hands trembling. Emma's mind ran through scenarios, calculating angles and escape routes. The playground was open, the exits blocked. Engaging them here would put too many people at risk. "How much?" Emma asked, her tone steady as she played for time. Steele grinned, sensing victory. $2,000 a month. First payment due tomorrow." "That's more than half my salary," Emma replied, her voice laced with just enough frustration to appear genuine. "Cheaper than hospital bills," Viper interjected, his grin revealing a chipped tooth. "Kids get hurt on playgrounds all the time." Something inside Emma snapped. They had crossed the line. Threatening her was one thing, but threatening Lily was unforgivable. She felt the familiar coldness settle over her, the same focus she used to steady her rifle in the field. Emma straightened, her gaze hard as steel. "You'll get your answer tomorrow." Steele leaned closer, his voice a low growl. "Don't think about calling the cops. That'll only make things worse, for everyone." The gang retreated, their motorcycles roaring to life as they sped out of the park. The other parents began emerging from hiding, their faces pale with fear. Jack Harris, the town's diner owner, approached Emma cautiously. "Emma, we need to call the sheriff." "Not yet," Emma said, her mind already formulating a plan. "Give me 24 hours. That night, after putting Lily to bed, Emma locked herself in her home office. She pulled a box from beneath her desk, its weight both literal and symbolic. Inside were the tools of her old life: a disassembled sniper rifle, tactical gear, and a satellite phone. She dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "Collins," a familiar voice answered. "It's Carter," Emma said. "I need a favor." There was a pause. "What's the situation?" "Looking. They're targeting the town. They don't know who they're dealing with." Collins chuckled. "All right, Emma, I'll get you the intel. But be careful. These small-town gangs have connections. You might be stepping into a bigger mess than you realize." Emma ended the call and began preparing. She had chosen Maple Ridge to escape her past, to give Lily a normal life. But her past was the only thing that could protect her future. The Iron Fangs thought they were predators. By this time tomorrow, they would learn what it was like to be prey. Morning came, and Emma's preparations were complete. She had scouted the town, noting the gang's movements and setting up surveillance. Lily was safely dropped off at school, her backpack containing an emergency GPS tracker. As Emma waited, the sound of approaching motorcycles signaled the gang's return. Steele and his men dismounted in front of her house, their confidence palpable. Steele pounded on the door. Emma opened it with a calm smile. "Good morning, gentlemen." "Morning," Steele said, stepping inside uninvited. "You've had some time to think. Got our money?" "No," Emma replied simply, her smile never wavering. Steele's face darkened. "That's a bad decision." "No," Emma said, her voice cold as ice. "Your bad decision was coming here." In an instant, the situation changed. Emma moved with the precision of someone who had spent years perfecting her craft. Steele's lieutenants found themselves disarmed and on the floor before they could react. Steele reached for his weapon, but Emma had already trained her rifle on him, her grip steady. "You're out of your league," she said, her voice as steady as her aim. "Leave this town, and don't come back." Steele glared at her, rage burning in his eyes. "You've just made a powerful enemy." Emma's gaze didn't waver. "So have you." As the gang retreated, Emma knew this was just the beginning. Steele wouldn't give up easily, but neither would she. For her daughter, for her town, and for the life she had fought so hard to build, Emma Carter was ready to go to war. Emma stood at the window, watching as the motorcycles roared down the quiet suburban street, their engines a fading echo of menace. She knew Steele and his gang weren't going to let this go, not after the way she had humiliated them. She had given them the opportunity to leave quietly, but they'd made their intentions clear. This was far from over, and the Iron Fangs weren't the kind of adversaries to simply back down. Emma turned away from the window and headed to her basement. She flipped the light switch, illuminating a space that looked far less like a storage room and more like a tactical operations center. Blueprints of the town were pinned to one wall, along with detailed notes and surveillance photos she had taken over the past 24 hours. She'd stayed up all night, mapping every possible scenario, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. She ran her fingers over the disassembled rifle on the table, its sleek, matte barrel gleaming under the fluorescent lights. She hadn't held a weapon like this in years, but as her hands began piecing it together, muscle memory took over. The motions were second nature, practiced thousands of times in the field. Her phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. It was a text from Collins. "Intel drops secured. You'll want to see this." She smiled faintly. Collins had always been reliable. Emma moved quickly, securing the rifle in a duffel bag alongside extra ammo, a sidearm, and tactical gear. She grabbed her keys and left the house, driving toward the drop point, a discreet location just outside of town. She had chosen this spot carefully, a secluded clearing near the edge of a wooded area, hidden from prying eyes but offering clear sightlines for security. As she approached, she spotted a black SUV parked under the canopy of trees. Collins leaned casually against the hood, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked older, more weathered than the last time she'd seen him, but his sharp eyes still carried the same intensity. "You're punctual," he said as she stepped out of her car. "You're predictable," she replied with a smirk. "What do you have for me?" Collins handed her a manila envelope. "Everything you need to know about the Iron Fangs, and then some. These guys aren't just a biker gang, Emma. They're running drugs, weapons, and—" He paused, his expression darkening. "Human trafficking." Emma's jaw tightened as she flipped through the photos and documents. Grainy images showed young women being forced into vans, their faces pale with terror. "They're using small towns like Maple Ridge as hubs," Collins continued. "Places where law enforcement is stretched thin and people are too scared to talk. But this operation? It's bigger than I thought. Steele's got backing, serious backing." Emma's eyes scanned the documents, absorbing every detail. There were maps of nearby towns, schedules of shipments, and even a ledger listing payments to corrupt officials. Her fingers lingered on a photo of a dilapidated warehouse just outside Maple Ridge. The caption read, "This warehouse," she said, holding up the photo. "Is this their main base?" "Looks like it," Collins confirmed. "But it's more than just a base. It's where they're holding the women." Emma's grip tightened on the photo. She could feel the familiar coldness settling over her, the same steely resolve that had carried her through countless missions. "We need to shut this down." Collins raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about a full assault on a fortified position. That's not exactly a one-person job." Emma met his gaze, her expression unyielding. "I don't intend to do it alone." Back in Maple Ridge, Emma began assembling her team. She reached out to Jack Harris, the diner owner who had been a Marine in his younger years, and Sarah Chen, the retired school principal, whose calm demeanor hid a sharp, tactical mind honed during her time in military intelligence. Together, they began strategizing, using the intel Collins had provided to map out their plan of attack. Word spread quickly among the town's veterans, and before long, a small group of capable and determined individuals had gathered at Emma's house. They were teachers, store owners, and retirees by day, but tonight, they were soldiers once more. Emma briefed them on the mission, her voice steady and authoritative. "The warehouse is heavily guarded," she said, pointing to the map pinned to her wall. "We'll divide into 3 teams. Team Alpha will disable the perimeter security and create a diversion. Team Bravo will secure the hostages. Team Charlie will cut off their escape routes and take out any reinforcements." Jack nodded, his weathered face set with determination. "What about Steele?" "He's mine," Emma said, her tone leaving no room for argument. As the group dispersed to prepare, Emma pulled Sarah aside. "I need you to stay behind," she said. "Someone needs to protect the kids." Sarah frowned. "Emma, you'll be outnumbered. You need every advantage you can get." "I know," Emma said softly. "But I can't risk leaving Lily unprotected. If something happens to me, I need to know she'll be safe." Sarah hesitated, but eventually nodded. "I'll keep her safe," she promised. The night was moonless, the darkness thick and oppressive as the teams moved into position around the warehouse. Emma crouched behind a cluster of bushes, her rifle slung over her shoulder, and her earpiece crackling softly with updates from the others. "Team Alpha in position," Jack's voice came through. "Team Bravo ready," Collins added. Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Execute!" The first explosion shattered the silence, a plume of smoke and fire rising from the far side of the warehouse as Team Alpha detonated a makeshift device near the fuel tanks. Shouts and alarms erupted as the guards scrambled to respond, leaving the perimeter vulnerable. Emma moved swiftly, her rifle up and ready as she took out 2 sentries with silent shots. The guards dropped silently, their weapons clattering to the ground. She signaled to Team Bravo, who slipped into the warehouse through a side entrance. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of oil and sweat. Rows of crates and pallets created a labyrinth of shadows, perfect for ambushes. Emma led the way, her footsteps silent as she moved toward the sound of muffled cries. She found the hostages in a dimly lit room, their wrists bound and their faces pale with fear. Collins and his team worked quickly, cutting the women free and guiding them toward the exit. "We've got them," Collins said over the comms. "Team Bravo is extracting." "Team Charlie, status?" Emma asked. "Escape routes secured," Jack replied. "No reinforcements yet, but they'll come soon." Emma nodded, her grip tightening on her rifle. Good. Keep moving. As the others evacuated, Emma pressed deeper into the warehouse, her senses on high alert. She could feel Steele's presence, like a predator lurking in the shadows. Her instincts proved correct when a sudden movement caught her eye. She spun just in time to dodge a knife aimed at her ribs, the blade glinting in the dim light. Steele stood before her, his scarred face twisted in a snarl. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" he growled. Emma didn't respond. Words were wasted on men like him. She lunged, her movements a blur of precision as she engaged him in hand-to-hand combat. Steele was strong, his attacks relentless, but Emma was faster, her years of training giving her the edge. The fight was brutal, each strike calculated and punishing. Steele landed a blow to her shoulder, but Emma countered with a sharp kick to his knee, sending him staggering. She seized the opportunity, disarming him and pinning him to the ground. "This ends now," she said, her voice cold and unwavering. Steele glared up at her, his chest heaving. "You think taking me down will stop this? You have no idea how deep this goes." Emma leaned in, her gaze steely. "Maybe not, but I'll make damn sure it stops here." By the time the police arrived, the warehouse was secure. The hostages were safe, the guards subdued, and Steele was in handcuffs. Emma watched from the shadows as the officers escorted the gang members into their vehicles. She felt a sense of relief, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this was only the beginning. Collins approached, his expression grim. "He's right, you know. This goes deeper than Steele." "I know," Emma said, "but one step at a time." As dawn broke over Maple Ridge, Emma returned home, exhausted but resolute. She found Lily asleep in her bed, her small form curled under the covers. Emma knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. For Lily, for the town, and for every innocent life the Iron Fangs had endangered, Emma knew she couldn't stop now. The war wasn't over, but the first battle had been won, and Emma Carter was ready for whatever came next. The morning after the warehouse raid was unusually quiet in Maple Ridge. The typical hum of early risers heading to work and kids making their way to school was replaced by a palpable stillness, the kind that settles over a town reeling from an event it doesn't fully understand. Emma stepped out onto her porch, her coffee steaming in the crisp morning air. Her sharp eyes scanned the horizon. The town looked peaceful on the surface, but she knew better. The Iron Fangs might have been dealt a blow, but they weren't finished. Steele had been taken into custody, but Emma doubted he would stay there for long. His cryptic warning about how deep this goes echoed in her mind. She had spent the night reviewing the intel Collins had provided, digging deeper into the connections between the gang and their mysterious backers. What she found unsettled her. A series of coded financial transactions pointed to a shadowy entity funding the Iron Fangs operations. The transactions originated from a private firm called Arcadia Holdings, which had a reputation for acquiring land through questionable means. Arcadia wasn't just backing the Iron Fangs. It was using them as a tool to destabilize small towns like Maple Ridge, driving out residents and lowering property values before swooping in to buy the land for pennies on the dollar. It wasn't just about money, though. There was a broader, more sinister strategy at play, and Emma knew she needed answers. She set her coffee down and returned to her basement, where the town map was still pinned to the wall. She marked the locations of Arcadia's land purchases with red pushpins. The pattern was clear. They were creating a corridor, a logistical pathway connecting multiple towns. It wasn't just a coincidence that Maple Ridge sat at the center of it. Emma's phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was Collins. "I got something for you," he said. "Arcadia's not just funding the gang. They've got boots on the ground, a team of private contractors posing as construction crews. They're stationed at one of their new acquisitions, an old factory on the edge of town. My guess? It's their next staging ground." Emma's jaw tightened. "Are they armed?" "Highly, this isn't a ragtag gang like the Fangs. These guys are ex-military, just like us." She nodded, her mind already formulating a plan. "I'll need backup." "You've got it," Collins replied. "I'll meet you at the diner in an hour." The diner was quiet when Emma arrived, the usual breakfast crowd noticeably absent. Jack and Sarah were already there, seated in their usual booth, along with a few other familiar faces from the raid. Collins sat at the head of the table, his laptop open, and a map displayed on the screen. "The factory is here," Collins began, pointing to a location on the map. "It's been abandoned for years, but Arcata moved in last month under the guise of renovating it. They've got a dozen contractors on site, but we know better. These aren't carpenters, they're mercenaries. Arcata's using the factory to store weapons, and possibly even hostages." Emma leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "If we take out the factory, we cut off their local supply chain. But we'll need to move fast. If they catch wind of us, they'll torch the place before we can get what we need." Jack spoke up, his voice steady. "What about the town? If they know we're coming, they might retaliate." "We'll divide and conquer," Emma said. "Collins and I will lead the assault on the factory. Jack, you and Sarah will stay back and secure the town. Set up checkpoints at the main roads and keep an eye out for any stragglers." Sarah nodded. "And what about Lily?" Emma hesitated for a moment. "I'll leave her with Mrs. Chan again. She'll be safe." The plan was set. They had no illusions about the risks, but none of them hesitated. This was their town, and they weren't about to let Arcadia destroy it. The factory loomed on the horizon, its rusted silhouette stark against the overcast sky. Emma crouched behind a line of shrubs, her rifle slung over her shoulder and her earpiece crackling with updates from Collins. "Brietta secured," he whispered. "2 guards at the front entrance, another on the roof. Cameras are positioned at the main gate and the south side." Emma adjusted the scope on her rifle, her sights trained on the rooftop guard. "I'll take the roof, you handle the front." "Copy that." Emma's shot was silent and precise, the rooftop guard dropping without a sound. She signaled to Collins, who moved swiftly, neutralizing the 2 guards at the entrance. The team advanced, slipping into the factory through a side door. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil and damp concrete. Rows of crates and machinery created a labyrinth of shadows, but Emma's instincts guided her. She motioned for Collins to follow as they moved deeper into the building, their footsteps silent on the cold floor. Voices echoed from a nearby room. Emma held up a hand, signaling for Collins to stop. She crept forward, peering through a crack in the door. Inside, a group of men in tactical gear were gathered around a table covered in blueprints and maps. At the center of the table was a satellite image of Maple Ridge. Emma's pulse quickened. This wasn't just about the factory. Arcadia was planning something bigger. She motioned for Collins to move in. Together they burst into the room, their weapons raised. The mercenaries reacted quickly, flipping the table for cover as a firefight erupted. Emma's movements were fluid, her shots precise as she took down one target after another. Collins covered her flank, his own skills as sharp as ever. When the dust settled, the room was silent, except for the hum of a nearby generator. Emma and Collins quickly searched the area, finding a laptop connected to a secure server. Collins worked to extract the data while Emma kept watch. "What are we looking at?" she asked. "Schedules, supply routes, personnel lists," Collins replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "But there's something else, a list of targets." Emma leaned over his shoulder, her stomach sinking as she read the names. They weren't just random residents. These were community leaders, business owners, and law enforcement officers, all people who had opposed Arcadia's efforts to take over the town. "They're planning to eliminate resistance," Emma said, her voice cold. Before Collins could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the hall. Emma grabbed the laptop and nodded toward a back exit. "Move." They slipped out just as reinforcements arrived, the shouts of the mercenaries fading as they disappeared into the woods. Back at their rendezvous point, Emma handed the laptop to Jack, who had joined them after securing the town. "We've got what we need," she said. "Now we take this fight to them." The rest of the day was a blur of activity as the team worked to analyze the data. They identified Arcadia's key personnel, their financial backers, and their connections to corrupt officials. With this information, they began to unravel the web of corruption that had enabled the Iron Fangs to operate unchecked. But Arcadia wasn't going to sit idly by. That night, a convoy of black SUVs rolled into town, their occupants armed and ready. Emma watched from a rooftop as the mercenaries spread out, their movements methodical and precise. This wasn't just a response, it was a message. Emma's earpiece crackled to life. "They're looking for you," Collins said. "Let them," she replied. As the night deepened, Emma and her team launched a series of calculated strikes against Arcadia's forces. using guerrilla tactics to outmaneuver and destabilize them. The once quiet town became a battlefield, but the residents fought back with a tenacity that Arcadia hadn't anticipated. By dawn, the mercenaries were in retreat, their vehicles fleeing down the highway. Emma stood at the town's edge, her rifle slung over her shoulder and her breath visible in the cool morning air. She had won this round, but she knew the war wasn't over. As the sun rose over Maple Ridge, Emma turned and walked back toward the town, her resolve stronger than ever. Arcadia had underestimated her, but they wouldn't make that mistake again, and neither would she. The quiet that fell over Maple Ridge in the aftermath of Arcadia's retreat was deceptive. Emma Carter knew better than anyone that the absence of immediate threats didn't mean they had been eliminated. As she walked back through the town, the early morning light casting long shadows across the streets, she felt the weight of what was yet to come. The mercenaries may have pulled back, but they weren't done. Arcadia wasn't just going to let Maple Ridge slip through their fingers. The people of the town had gathered at the diner to regroup. Jack Harris, his knuckles bruised from the fight, stood near the counter, talking with a few of the other veterans who had taken up arms to protect their home. Sarah Chen moved among the tables, organizing the intel they had gathered and coordinating relief efforts for the damage done during the night. Emma, all eyes turned to her, their unspoken questions hanging in the air. "We'll be back," Emma said simply, addressing the roan. This wasn't their end game. Jack nodded, crossing his arms. "What's the next move?" Emma unfolded the map she'd brought with her and spread it out on the counter. It showed the entire region with key Arcadia locations marked in red. "We have to hit them where it hurts. This is no longer about defending the town. We need to go on the offensive." Collins, leaning against the far wall, raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about taking the fight to Arcadia?" Emma met his gaze, her voice steady. "Exactly. We've got their operational data. We know their supply routes, their staging grounds, and their financial backers. If we can disrupt their operations at the source, they won't have the resources to come back here." Jack tapped a spot on the map. "What about this location, the regional hub they've been using as a coordination center?" Emma nodded. "It's their next most vulnerable point. But it won't be easy. They'll be expecting retaliation after what happened last night. We need to be smarter, faster, and more precise." Sarah spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "If we're going to do this, we'll need the community's support. We've got fighters here, yes, but we'll also need resources, supplies, transport, communication equipment." "We'll get it," Emma said. "People are scared, but they're also angry. Arcadia pushed too far, and now they're going to see what happens when you corner people who have everything to lose." Over the next 2 days, Maple Ridge transformed. The townspeople, galvanized by Emma's leadership, came together in ways they hadn't before. Farmers donated fuel and trucks for transport. Mechanics repurposed old farm equipment into makeshift barricades and vehicles. The local hardware store supplied tools, and the school gym became a temporary command center. With Emma and Collins worked tirelessly, training small groups of volunteers in basic tactics and coordination. Many of them were veterans or had family members who served, but even those with no military experience learned quickly. The stakes were too high for hesitation. Lily, sensing the tension, stayed close to Mrs. Chen, who had turned her home into a safe haven for the town's children. Emma checked in with her daughter whenever she could, but the moments were brief. Lily's small hands would cling to her mother's arm, her big brown eyes full of questions she didn't know how to ask. "Are you going to stop the bad man, Mom?" Lily asked one evening, her voice quiet. Emma knelt in front of her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, sweetie, I promise. But I need you to be brave for me, okay? Stay with Mrs. Chen and help her take care of the other kids." Lily nodded, her small chin trembling. "I will." Emma hugged her tightly, her resolve hardening. She wasn't just fighting for the town, she was fighting for Lily's future. The operation to take down Arcadia's regional hub began under the cover of darkness. Emma, Collins, and a team of 12 volunteers moved out in a convoy of repurposed farm trucks and SUVs. They had divided into 3 teams, each with a specific objective: sabotage, disruption, and extraction. The hub was a sprawling compound on the outskirts of a neighboring town, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Floodlights illuminated the perimeter, and armed guards patrolled in pairs. The compound was a hive of activity, with trucks coming and going, carrying crates marked with Arcadia's logo. Emma and her team parked a mile out and approached on foot, using the dense tree line for cover. Through her binoculars, she studied the layout, noting the positions of the guards and the locations of key infrastructure. "Collins," she whispered into her radio, "take your team and hit the power station. I want those floodlights out before we move in." "Copy that," came his reply. Emma turned to Jack, who was leading the sabotage team. "Once the lights go out, you'll have a 10-minute window to take out their vehicles. Disable the engine, slash the tires. Make sure nothing leaves this compound tonight." Jack nodded, a grim smile on his face. "We've got it." Emma's team would handle the extraction. According to Collins' intel, the compound wasn't just a logistics center. It was also holding several hostages who had been taken from nearby towns. Emma's gut twisted at the thought of what those people had endured, but she pushed the emotion aside. There was no room for hesitation. The lights went out like clockwork. A chorus of shouts erupted from the guards as they scrambled to react, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Jack's team moved in next, their movements swift and silent as they sabotaged the trucks and heavy equipment. The guards were disoriented, their radio communications jammed by a device Collins had rigged from scavenged parts. Emma and her team slipped through a gap in the fence and headed toward the building where the hostages were being held. The interior was dimly lit, the air heavy with the smell of sweat and fear. Emma led the way, her rifle at the ready. In a large room near the back of the building, they found the hostages, 6 men and 3 women, their wrists bound and their faces hollow with exhaustion. Emma quickly cut their bindings, her voice calm and reassuring. "We're here to get you out. Can you walk?" Most of them nodded, though one woman had to be supported by a volunteer. Emma signaled for the team to move, but as they reached the hallway, the sound of boots on concrete froze them in their tracks. "Down," Emma hissed, pulling the hostages into a side room as a group of guards rounded the corner. She motioned for one of the volunteers to stay with the hostages, then moved to intercept the guards. The firefight was brief but intense. Emma's team used the element of surprise to their advantage, taking out the guards with surgical precision. As the last man fell, Emma signaled for the hostages to move again. By the time they reached the extraction point, the compound was in chaos. Jack's team had rigged several trucks with explosives, and the resulting detonations sent plumes of fire and smoke into the sky. Collins and his team were covering their retreat, engaging the remaining guards in a series of hit-and-run attacks. Emma helped load the hostages into the waiting vehicles, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of reinforcements. "Go," she shouted, slapping the side of the truck as it roared to life. "Get them out of here!" She turned back to Collins, who was crouched behind a stack of crates, reloading his rifle. "We're clear," she said. "Time to fall back." Collins nodded, and together they retreated into the night, the sound of explosions and gunfire fading behind them. Back in Maple Ridge, the rescued hostages were taken to the community center, where Sarah and a team of volunteers provided food, medical care, and a safe place to rest. Word of the successful raid spread quickly, and the townspeople began to believe that victory was possible. But Emma knew better than to celebrate. The data they had recovered from the compound revealed that Arcadia had a second, even larger hub farther north, a heavily fortified location that served as the nerve center for their entire operation. Taking it down would require more than just the resources of Maple Ridge. Collins approached her as she stood in the doorway of the community center, watching the sunrise. "You're thinking about the next step," he said. "I have to," Emma replied. "If we don't take out that hub, Arcadia will just regroup and come back stronger." Collins nodded. "We'll need more help. Other towns, other people willing to fight back." Emma turned to him, her eyes filled with determination. "Then we find them. We show them that standing together is the only way to win." As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, Emma knew the battle for Maple Ridge was only the beginning. Arcadia's shadow loomed large, but so did the strength of the people who refused to be broken. Together they would fight, together they would endure, and together they would win. And if this story hooked you, there's another one on screen that you'll love. Subscribe to stay updated with all the inspiring, dramatic, and jaw-dropping stories we have in store.